All right, guys, good morning. Welcome to Monk's Musings. This is episode 3. Our topic today is Dungeons and Dragons. Today we have, once again, Adnoth. I was trying to do my hand. I was out of the camera. Adnoth and Dire Fist. We do have them labeled, so you can know the difference between them. How's it going, guys?
But it doesn't have our expiration dates yet.
It doesn't. No, I didn't get the health inspection yet, so I can't do any of that.
It's going well. How are you doing?
Pretty good.
Aside from sleep.
Aside from, I just woke up about 30 minutes ago, so. But we have coffee. I'm sure everybody has coffee as usual. Raise your coffee glasses.
And orange juice.
Getting your vitamin C too?
Oh yeah.
Very cool. I don't know why this, I know why this reminded me. It has nothing to do with this topic, but I saw a joke the other day and it was like, can you die from too much vitamin D? And somebody, it was like a Reddit post, and somebody went, "That's what killed Icarus." And I thought that was hilarious.
Wow.
That's what killed Icarus.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I know you can't die from too much vitamin C though, because you'll just flush it out of
Yeah.
your system and your urine if you drink too much.
Yeah.
Or have too much vitamin C.
It's pretty fascinating.
Isn't also that like you can drink so much that like you don't get the benefits of it because you're flushing it out?
Yeah, at some point your body stops absorbing it.
Right.
And it just passes through.
Yeah, but I thought that like where it
does.
doesn't absorb like anything.
Oh no.
I've never heard that.
I've never heard that either.
It could still be true. I'm not an expert.
I am, and it's not.
Cool. I trust that.
Anyway, today we're talking about Dungeons and Dragons. We have on today a expert dungeon master who's also has run several campaigns, is probably currently running at least 3, and is also writing his own what do you call it?
A campaign setting.
A campaign setting. Okay. We have a moderately experienced person that has played D&D several times, and we have a sort of beginner who has just recently delved into the world of D&D, or the worlds of D&D.
I know nothing.
Yeah. So we have like an expert,
Well, if you know
average,
anything about,
and a beginner.
If you know anything about certain Magic the Gathering worlds, then you already know a whole lot about some of it.
That's true. So
they are canonically in the D&D multiverse now.
So Adnoth will probably, Adnoth will probably know.
And Theros in about 2 weeks.
Oh, I didn't know Theros was coming out with a guide.
There's the source book coming out in about 2 or 3 weeks for Theros.
That's cool.
See, you'll be an expert in certain areas of it now, in some of the lore, because you have a background in Magic the Gathering. And I'm just a guy that likes to roleplay, I guess. Let's go Adnoth first. Let's talk about your recent foray into D&D. How about that?
All right. So a mutual friend of ours that lives in Florida was running a campaign for a bunch of other friends. And my wife and I were down in Florida about a month ago, about the beginning of this whole sequester yourself from the world thing. And anyway, we were down there visiting my family, and he asked if we wanted to take these like minor roles in a campaign that he had written for it was like he was doing like one-off stories for each of his characters in his main campaign, and so it was one of those one-off stories. So we did, and it was really interesting. It was a lot of fun. It just learning D&D through this friend was an interesting experience, because he's very he'll just like expand forever, and to every facet of what's happening, and then nothing will actually happen in the story. Like there's no forward motion or very little. So that part was, I think, probably not ideal for my first time in, because most of the like 3 hours that we were there, we were just sitting there doing nothing. Uh, but once we actually got into the story and actually started doing it, it was like a heist. We were stealing a jewel from a local lord. Uh, it was really fun. And because there was like an hour and a half, 2 hours of exposition before we actually got started, we did not finish, and this one-off campaign is going to be at least 2, and we'll see when the next part happens. But it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed crafting my character. That was a neat experience. My younger brother has done D&D forever, and so our friend asked him to help me and my wife create our own characters, and before going to the campaign, and that was a blast. It was really neat to do that. So it was fun. Other than that, like I said earlier, the only thing I know of D&D is things I've seen in social or pop culture kind of stuff, like Community. Yeah, that's it. I'm done.
I was actually in your brother's. I was one of your brother's guinea pigs for his first foray into dungeon mastering, and that was a lot of fun. Very fun campaign. I think it's still going on. That's been like 4 years, and it's just been a rotating cast of players. And I think your dad plays in that one too.
Yeah, that's something
that's really cool. Yeah, you should talk about that.
Has been playing D&D for, I mean, I don't even know how long, forever. And then, like Dyer was saying, a few years back, he started his first campaign as a DM, and I think he does really well at it based on knowing him.
He also he knows so much information about sort of medieval functions of society, of different people and crafts and like jewel, like he knows a lot about like jewel craft and things like that, but also blacksmithing, because that's what he does like part-time and in real life. And so he pulls a lot of his knowledge of those things and his sort of survivalist nature into being able to apply those knowledge of those things into the game, which is really interesting.
Yeah, and he's always been, I mean, since he was a little kid, a very prolific reader. And so he's fairly good at crafting stories too, but just because he's read so many. But anyway, so he's been doing that for years. I just never had opportunity or a moment in my life that D&D ever came up, so it didn't ever cross me. And then a couple of years ago, I guess my dad wanted something to do, and my brother convinced him to go play in his campaign, and he really enjoyed it. Like, Dad really enjoyed it. So it's a little odd that my father played D&D before I did, but he didn't play it as like a kid or anything. It was like a year ago or something.
Yeah. That's if you knew Adnav's dad, like, that's what really gets you.
It's really funny to think about.
Yeah, it is really. It's really funny to think about. I mean, he's hilarious. Don't get me wrong. Like, I love your dad, but like, he doesn't seem like the kind of person you think of him like role playing.
No. Yeah.
Yeah, you know what I mean? It's just really funny. Character creation and story development is always the slowest part. It's usually rough, yeah, because the first session, for sure. How's it going, Maelstrom?
Especially that there's this learning curve that you have to get past, and it helps a lot if you have a really good DM to sort of help teach you the rules as you're playing, instead of you having to go through and be like, oh, read this book and then do it. But there is definitely a learning curve. But in my experience, after a certain like 2 or 3 games, all of a sudden you basically know how to do everything.
Yeah. So for me, my experience has been mostly I was actually just trying to think if I have had any other DM besides you.
I don't think you have.
And I don't think I have, which is kind of interesting.
And you've definitely seen some growth in that part from me.
Yeah, I mean, you've always been really good, but I mean, I'm not gonna.
It was rough in the beginning.
Yeah,
it was rough.
Well, that's what I was gonna say. Like, I didn't have a reference, so to me, you did a really good job. I don't know, but you know, like you probably have had several DMs in the past before you even started doing it yourself, and
actually, yeah, kind of.
Or you at least knew the arena and you have watched other people DM.
Yeah.
I'm sure you were into like Critical Role and all that kind of thing before as well. But like to me, I think you did a really good job.
Oh.
But yeah, I'm trying to think. I think we might have done a one-off with Cody one time as the DM, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, we played a game that wasn't D&D, but it was very similar, and it was like
maybe
a board
that's
game
what I'm thinking of.
That was all about like being transported into different realms to like fix a problem, but you're like time travelers.
And we were like I remember what you're talking about. Yeah. That was a really fun board game.
That was.
So maybe that's what I'm thinking of. But
I think that was.
It felt like a D&D campaign to me.
It did.
But yeah, we've played at least 2 campaigns together, maybe 3. And then we had...
I can remember 3 distinct ones right now.
Yeah, we had, differing groups of people, different travelers, if you will, with us. And then we did that podcast. I don't know if you want to get into that, but
yeah. It's kind of a sore spot for me, but yeah.
I don't know, man. I thought it when we were doing it was going really well.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll talk about that when I talk about my experiences.
Yeah, but that's kind of my experience. Like, I don't have a lot of role play experience either, and like, I think for me, it at first it's really uncomfortable at first, and like you feel really weird, but like it's way better when you know all the people, obviously. So that really helps. But like even character creation, like Theta was talking about, that's like a really tough one for me because I have like decision anxiety. So like creating a character for me is like, what if I make the wrong decision and then later on I'm like, oh, this character sucks. And so like I'm like very meticulous when I'm trying to choose a character, and then I get like anxiety and crippling. It's like crippling to the point where I can't create the character because I'm like afraid it's gonna turn out wrong. But yeah, virtual campaign. Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, we can definitely talk about that as well. So that's kind of my experience with D&D. I love D&D. I love watching people play it. I do love playing it myself, but again, I don't have like a lot of role play experience, so it's but it's fun, like creating worlds in your mind or having somebody create a world and you're exploring it, and the DM is like explaining this brand new thing to you that you've never heard of before is really intriguing to me, and that's why I love D&D. Tyre?
Expert time.
Expert time.
So my experience was a little weird because you would think that I would have always been the kind of person that loved it, but there were years where I basically kind of almost had this disdain for D&D because I just was scared and didn't understand it. And so I did other things like text-based RPGs that I like ran with people, and I didn't know those existed. I kind of did, but I sort of did those just with friends. Particularly, there were some friends that had like some anxiety and like depression issues, and I was trying to help them, like give them a world to just sort of explore a fantasy world and sort of essentially DM that. But it was all, there were no like dice rolls or anything. I was just sort of deciding how successful their attempts were at stuff. But then because of that, I told one of our friends, the same friend that actually Adnath was talking about, the mutual friend of ours that was running this game that he was a part of, about this. And he had this thing called the starter set, this D&D starter set. And he said, hey, since you're the most likely person to sort of know how to do this, would you be willing to give this a go and like run this for some of our friends?" And I said, "Sure." So really, my first in-depth foray into D&D was that moment where I just did some research and like how to dungeon master, things like that, and
Which,
and
knowing you, I'm sure that research was fairly exhaustive.
if I'm very interested in a topic, I can literally spend 8 hours that feel like 2 hours just researching something. Yeah. But it was. So I did that. But I should mention that before this, somebody did try to get me to play like a D&D game as a player back when there was the current edition of D&D is called 5th edition. It's a very streamlined edition of it. But before there were a bunch of other editions before this, and this was an older edition that was very numbers based, and like you had to like account for so many numbers, so much math, so many modifiers to everything, and it was so complex that I really did not like the experience at all. But when 5th edition came around and I sort of read how it's different, I was like, wow, this is really effective for a variety of mechanical reasons that make a lot of sense. It some people say it dumbs it down, and I think in some regard that is true, but I think it makes things more efficient. So instead of like getting in a battle that could last for literally an hour, battle could last for just really a few minutes, which is ideal, I think, in a game like this where you have multiple people playing. But anyway, I did that. I ran this game. I made the mistake of saying, "Sure, I'll run whatever number of people we have," and it was literally all of our friends. So I was running 12 people through my first game, and it was exhausting and terrifying and frustrating in a lot of ways, and it didn't go nearly as well as I had hoped. But apparently everybody else didn't have anything to compare it to, so they enjoyed it.
Real quick, so I can be on the same page right now. Who is it that asked you to do this?
Cody.
Really?
Cody and Harris. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that they were the ones that asked you to DM the first time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And so
and just so that I'm clear, you hadn't really even been a player in a D&D game before?
No, just that one that I didn't like.
Yeah.
That is interesting.
Yeah. And so
you were just like, I've never really done this before, but sure, I'll DM.
Yeah, so after reading through it and researching it, because the starter set, like, it's designed to help you as the DM know what you're doing. Like, that's how it's designed. Okay. I think it does a really good job. And now there's an updated version called the Essentials Kit, which sort of expands the adventures of that one, and it's a little different way to start. That came out, like, within the last year, I think. But so that was my first real experience, and then since then I've run several different campaigns, usually set in the generic fantasy setting for the official D&D material called the Forgotten Realms or Faerun, which if you've ever read like novels like The Legend of Drizzt and things like that, those books are set in this world, and that it's one of the original campaign settings that existed for D&D since like the 80s, and it was designed by Ed Greenwood, and it sort of just persisted since then. But that's where I was running most of them. And then finally I was like, you know what, I'd like to try some other. So I've run a lot of campaigns. I've been a part of several of them. Run a lot of one-shots, which are just references to that's a reference to just a one-off game that lasts just a few hours, and it's designed to start and end, and then it's over at that point. And most recently, I have designed, and it's sort of, I have a lot of play testers for it at this point, but I've been playing it for a while with people. I do one-on-one sessions with players in this world, even though they're all playing in the same world, but I've only done it one-on-one with them, not in groups yet. But it's basically it's a fantasy Western with very low magic. Essentially, it's a fantasy Western set in a time after Armageddon has happened and all the gods are dead, so there's no magic anymore. And so you've got elves and dwarves and orcs with revolvers and gnomes making steam locomotives and things like that. And I have a lot of fun designing that one, but that's the one that we refer to sometimes when we're talking about the game that I do, and it's the name of it is called The Barons. But yeah, so that's a sort simple insight into what my experience has been up to this point with D&D. But I would say that now that I've done it for years, I would definitely say that I have a lot more knowledge than the average person
Fair.
about D&D and
Yeah.
a lot of experience as a DM at this point.
Also, you need to talk about the podcast now.
Oh yeah. So
Yeah.
in part of this time after we while I was still kind of fresh into it, and we were all Monk and I and our friend Orpheus and his wife and a sibling of hers all went to a local game shop and kind of managed. I talked to one of the people working there, and we managed to get a situation in which we could be sort of their official D&D game / podcast / video series about a D&D game. But the idea of it was going to be that we were all kind of fresh to the experience of D&D. So it would be people watching an inexperienced group of players and a somewhat inexperienced DM sort of grow through the process of going through this game. So it seemed like a good idea at the time, but in many ways, like, it was, I've learned a lot since then that, like, I cringe thinking about things I did as a DM, and there were some other things behind the scenes that weren't so favorable about that situation either, that made it difficult to pursue that very seriously. We did like 3 or 4 or 5 different games and a few podcasts as like after shows that just Monk and I were involved in, along with a few guest talker, co-hosts, etc. Yeah, so that was another thing that we did at the time. But it was fun, but most of my memories of it are not pleasant.
Do you still have the recordings of all those?
No, I don't have any of the recordings. I think that they saved them on their equipment in their stuff, and I never.
And we never got them?
No.
Yeah, because they don't even exist anymore.
Yeah.
That's so crazy.
Either they are just collecting dust somewhere, or they've been destroyed at this point.
That's funny. Yeah, I had a really good time doing that campaign, and it was fun. Like when we were into it, like when we could get everybody there and agree on a time and all that kind of thing. I thought it was a really fun campaign, and I liked that we kind of wrapped up the ends of the campaign episodes with like an actual talk show podcast. Yeah. That was a lot of fun for me. But yeah, it kind of just fizzled out really.
The podcast part was the most fun part for me.
Yeah. I like that too, but I thought, I don't know that I have such a bad memory as you do. I don't know if it's because you were the DM.
I think it was a lot of the anxiety about running this and being basically responsible for how things go.
It was cool that, and I'm sure this was a lot of pressure too, but it was cool that this local game shop was like letting us do this, and they had their own like sound booth space that we were in.
It was a really cool space.
It was like a sound padded walls, and they had like a window that you could look out or look in. If you were outside playing like board games and stuff, they would have Magic nights, Pokemon nights, board game nights, and then we would be there recording the show and the podcast afterwards, and like people would be like, hey, what are you guys doing? And we get to explain all that, which is really cool. And as far as I knew, the people that were running the shop were really cool about it too, and they were really into it.
Yeah, definitely.
But I wasn't the DM, so I probably didn't see a lot of the behind the scenes of what you had to deal with as far as that goes. I don't know if you wanted to get into that, but
it was mostly just things about my own expectations and no hard feelings towards anybody there.
Okay, yeah.
In any way, but there were some.
I was gonna say, do I need to go beat somebody up? Like
in people's understandings of like what we were doing and the time that we needed and the time that we were available. But those are just minor things.
Yeah.
There have been 2 questions that came up that I'd like to touch on.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and we can ask, or Theta Base was asking, have you ever done a virtual campaign before? Curious how successful that could be, as I've only done in-person campaigns before. I personally have not done any virtual campaigns, but we are talking about doing that in the future. Have you done the virtual campaigns?
Yeah, so I have, and hi, Waiting Warrior. So actually, all of these Barons campaigns that I've mentioned have been virtual. I specifically wanted to do one-on-one things because that was my first real foray into virtual games like that. Um, so there are a variety of programs that are out there that are designed to help you run virtual D&D games, but unless you're really experienced with them, it would be, I think, a tough thing to run unless you really get used to them. And you're going to spend a lot of time just trying to figure out how this works, and if anybody does anything that you're not expecting, you have to figure out how to adjust the program to make up for that if you're the DM. Whereas what I do with it is I actually just share simple Google spreadsheets and Google Docs that me and the player that are playing can both adjust and look at the same time because they update in real time. And so, like with a spreadsheet, I'll make a battle map, and I'll just say, okay, these are 5-foot squares, and you can do whatever. Tell me what position you're going to, etc. You can move We'll put a little. If your name starts with a K, we'll put a little K on a box, and then you can move it wherever on your turn. Things like that. So I try to find like the simplest, most efficient way that I can imagine to sort of do that. But I also use a lot of theater of the mind instead of using visual aids. In the beginning, I used a ton of visual aids when I was first DMing, but I think there's a lot to be said for doing theater of the mind. And that, I think, if you're really good at theater of the mind, is a great way to be able to do things virtually online with people.
I think one of the funny things about the
briefly.
Yeah, go ahead.
What's that?
As someone from the outside, I remember most of my view of D&D was you didn't need anything other than a few dice. And so when I started like looking into Critical Role and watching things and talking with some of our friends that play, and I think Michael is my brother's a lot like that and uses, at least from what he's told me, uses very few things. He's got a lot of books about D&D, but that's just for him as the DM. So when I started looking into the ways people played, I was very like shocked. Like, what is all of this crap all over the place? Why does everybody have so many things when they're playing this? Isn't the game in your head? As an outsider, I agree, and I felt like that was one of the things that was a draw to me, was that you didn't need stuff. You could just come and have fun with your friends.
Yeah, literally the only thing you really need as a player is something to, after you have a character created, is just some polyhedral dice.
Yeah. So I've also seen a lot of campaigns at like card shops where I go to play Magic going on, and they have been in both directions. Sometimes they have nothing and are just sitting around a table talking, basically. And sometimes they've got like a map and tons of reference materials and figurines. And now the figurines and stuff, I've seen people do art with them. Like I've seen you do that, but I've also seen online a lot, and that's really cool. I love people getting involved and dedicated into their character and stuff. But yeah, one of the biggest draws to me was that you didn't need a bunch of crap, and so I agree. I like the theater of the mind approach and less required physical elements.
Yes, and really, if you master like the theater of the mind approach, then everything else will come afterwards and will be easier.
Yeah, and to your point too, is like we could literally start a D&D campaign right this second because it's a conversation we're having. You know, it's a real-time world-building experience that, I mean, obviously we could have prepared material, but we could also just go ahead and just go, you know what I mean? And make it up as you go, which is I'm sure is a big draw to a lot of people. I was going to talk about what you were talking about with the virtual campaigns. The interesting thing about that is that it's not in real time. It's like a time-shifted thing, right? So you have sent people the world that they can study, and then they make decisions, and then you kind of, or I guess the world makes decisions and they react to the world's decisions, and then you kind of have to read their reaction and be like, okay, this is happening now. I feel like that's a much different experience than being there in the moment and being able to react off of each other.
Yeah, I think so.
Is it harder? Is it easier?
I think that running virtual campaigns with multiple people, the more people you add onto it, it's going to be more difficult. There are already difficulties with. Sorry, I just coughed and and I have something in my throat now. But there are already difficulties that exist even in a game where you're playing directly with people at a table. Where the more people you add, the more stress it puts on the DM. So one piece of advice right away is the best number of people to have at your gaming table if you're the DM is 3 or 4, or less. But like basically no more than 4 unless you're really experienced.
And now we call back.
First game like I did.
Now we call back to the first time he ever DM'd, and we had about 12 people.
Yeah, I just had flashbacks, and it was I had the Vietnam
PTSD.
helicopters in my head, yeah. But
you wake up in the middle of the
night. Yeah, but there are already those problems that exist, and the more people you add on, there's more to take into account about the differences between how your players enjoy playing the game, who likes to steal the spotlight even inadvertently, and not allowing other players to really experience what they need to experience to enjoy the game and not just be there watching. Yeah, and there will always be somebody in your group that says, I'm the lone wolf and I don't get along with anybody, and they're going to cause problems. So I encourage you to always make sure ahead of time that you talk to your players and say, make sure that there's a reason that your character wants to or could be convinced to, in the first few minutes of the game, work with a group. Because anytime that you have that character in it in which the player is not willing to make their character work with it, what that player really wants is the experience of just being able to play this cool, edgy character, which is not a problem. Like, you can do that, but they really want that game to themselves. But make sure that you understand, and your group understands, that this is something that works best when you don't have a bunch of people trying to be lone wolves.
Yeah. And it doesn't really make sense for the story either.
Yeah, exactly. and be cognizant of other people's desires. Like, they want to play a game and you want to play a game, but you all want to play a game together, and it's not about you versus the players, and really it's not even about you versus the DM. It's about you versus the world that the DM is hosting for you.
Yeah.
And a good DM is not looking to kill their characters, in my opinion. Or their player characters. A good DM is looking to supply a story by which, if there happens to be player deaths, it's because the dice rolled as they will. I used to have very different opinions on letting that happen, but I now believe that let the dice roll as they do, and leave it at that.
Let fate decide.
Because that makes a more interesting game in a variety of ways anyway. But as far as to go back to the original question, I do think that there are elements of running a virtual game that make it more different, or make a difference in difficulty, just based on the fact that you have people that are trying to talk over one another in a thing like this, where some people are lagging a little more than others with the audio feedback, just natural things like that. And sometimes people's internet connection is not good, and there's all these variety of factors that just don't happen when you're in person. So I would even recommend that if you're doing a virtual game, maybe even shoot for having one less player than you normally would in an in-person session. Sometimes you don't have any choice because you've got a game that COVID-19 interrupts your gaming life, and then it's like, the only time we can play is with this group that we've already established. And it's not impossible, but just be prepared for that being a potential issue. And as I think digital technology and streaming technology is to the point that that's probably not as big of an issue as it would have been even just a year ago, really. Because you've got a lot of things sort of built in, like even Discord is always updating with like hey, we made this easier and the functionality is better for this and that all the time. Like it literally just in the past month has updated with like 3 quality of life updates and things. And I think Discord's a great thing to use for that, for instance.
Yeah.
But be prepared for those potential things happening.
Maelstrom was asking, because my best friend is working on a D&D style world, have any of you created a world, lore, race, etc. for D&D style game? And yeah, we were talking about that a little bit at the beginning. Direfist is actually working on one right now called The Barons, and we can have him kind of talk about that in depth later on, but it's Western, low magic Western, and he has... Which version is this? 4.9?
So it's called 4.9 because I always, anytime I update this document, I send, it's like a almost 30-page document right now. I send
Yeah, I was
all my
going to say
friends
it's
an
28
updated version
pages.
with a change log as to all the changes.
Yep.
Yeah, so right now he has a book that he's written with locations, races, lore, layout of areas. I mean, like background on background of certain characters and outlaws, different factions. And you just mentioned you have faction flags now, even?
Yeah, so Waiting Warrior is actually in the chat right now. I sent him some things asking him a question about just converting things into simple digital images, and he just went ahead and took care of them for me. So now I have visual aids for all the faction flags.
Amazing.
Because he does graphic design. He's really good at it.
Yeah, Waiting Warrior did my emotes. So if you have emotes from this channel, spam them in the chat real quick so Waiting Warrior can see. But yeah, it's very in depth. It's very impressive. I'll say that. Like
Thanks.
when you sent me this the first time, I was like, what is happening? Like it feels like you wrote I mean you wrote like an entire book almost. As far as D&D standards go, you've created a whole other world.
That was the idea.
And you have so much detail.
Like, one thing I will say, because a lot of people are very interested in creating worlds for D&D that are, they might have had these worlds in their head from the time they were children, and they're like, oh, I can make this a reality now, because D&D is a great medium to experience a story if you don't want to, write a novel. And one of the things I will say is you don't have to make it like a huge in-depth kind of thing. Just use existing materials and rules that are in like the player's handbook or the dungeon master's guide, and then just write out your lore. And my suggestion is to not treat it as if you're trying to write it for somebody that you're doing like an elevator pitch with every page, where it's just like, these are just the main things you need to know about this and this, and if there's any special mechanics, the way things work in your world. For instance, I have a restriction on what kind of like archetypes you can choose in subclasses because it's a no magic world, but I go ahead and list the ones that are available to choose in it. You don't make it like an official source book if you're intimidated by it that's like 400 pages long. Just focus on like here's like a 30-page document at best. When I first started it, I think it was a 12-page document. Now it's 30, just because every once in a while I add something on that I think this would work really well for this world. But I don't set off to make a huge book. I just set off to say, here's some simple information, and then eventually, as I come up with something else, I'll add more to it.
Yeah. Well, see, from an outsider's perspective that doesn't do anything like this, or has never done anything like this, it seems like you've been working on this for years.
Yes.
It's
right?
Really just been like 4 or 5 months, but
okay, that's actually longer than I thought you were working on it, but still.
Yeah,
but I appreciate that.
When my brother helped us create characters, I mean, he grabbed his source book or whatever and had us read up on a few different subclasses and that kind of stuff. And this looks like that. I mean, like to me when I'm looking through at the classes and stuff. I mean, it looks very well thought out and fleshed out, and the options seem to all be there, but it is a 30-page document instead of a 400, 200, however long that book was. And so as an outsider, it looks much less intimidating to me than the book that my brother handed me.
That's good. Here, I'll do a
it's
screen
all
share
here.
just for reference. Unless one of you have it open, that's fine too.
Yeah, I've got it open. Let me
Because I don't know how to do a screen share. Oh, here it is.
here, hold on one second.
Application window.
There you
There
go.
we go. So this is my. I used a very simple thing to create the emblem for this. It's an application online, a free application called Hero Machine 3, I think, and it just lets you do a bunch of different stuff. So I made the heading that way. But simple idea if you're making a book for yourself, I tend to just start with a little bit piece of lore here and then describe what this book is, and then over here is just here's the index. So I added a timeline, locations, and other things, factions, just as they came up. And a lot of this didn't exist in the very beginning, special rules, etc. One of the things that I chose to do, because somebody asked about custom races and things, is I chose to include only races that existed in older versions of D&D, and sort of if they didn't have a modern 5th edition counterpart, I put them in here and decided that, hey, let's make, or some of them are like playable races now that there are bullywugs in the monster manual for D&D, but there weren't any playable versions of them, so I went ahead and just designed one. And if a playable version ever comes out, I'll just replace this with the official version. And then afterwards, just use some variant rules that exist in other forms of D&D, but I wanted to make them accessible here. So I just essentially copy-pasted them and adjusted them for the world. Yeah, very simple stuff.
Yeah, so you base this, as far as the rules and stuff go, on the latest handbook, though? So it's like a
the latest edition. So 5th edition,
5th edition
is the current edition of D&D, and it's got a lot of source books with but the main ones that you need if you're going to be a DM. As a player, you just need your dice, and your player's handbook would be ideal, but your DM might be able to provide that information for you anyway. But if you're running a game, a Dungeon Master's Guide is very helpful. The core 3 are the Dungeon Master's Guide, the Player Handbook, and the Monster Manual. And now they actually sell those as a set, I believe. But those are the 3 that in any edition of D&D that you really need to get a good grasp of what the game is. But at least the Player Handbook and the Monster Manual are absolutely essential for being able to run most games.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a map yet of this world, as far as like?
Yeah, actually. So I'll screen share one more time, and if I go into here, I have a clickable map.
Oh, you
right
do? I haven't
here.
seen that yet.
Yeah, and let me open that up in the application window. And I'm still getting used to how to do this here.
Map of the Barrens.
Cool. So there's the current map as it exists. I used I think it's called Hexographer for this. But I just created sort of a general idea. There weren't nearly as many settlements on here as there are now, but some of them have popped up into existence as have randomly determined as people are traveling through this land that you happen to come across an unmarked settlement, and then I'll add them to the map for later. So in a way, I'm using sort of guinea pigs to help me develop the world more by having people play in it.
Okay.
So I've got a question. So this Barrens map, is this everything on the world, or is this just like a continent or a section
So
of a continent?
yeah, both. In the world of the Barrens, this is the known world, because in the wilds over here, these northern mountains are impassable. They're terrifying sea things that prevent anybody from really sailing out anywhere here. And the wilds, people don't go into them because there are supposedly things living in there that make people go crazy if they spend too long in there, and they
Supposedly, huh?
yeah, and if you
I'm
go
getting
in,
some
some
strong
people,
The Village vibes here. I
yeah,
think we need
things
to
like that.
wander off into.
Oh,
It's just
yeah.
basically they are places that people could try to go through, but everybody knows they're very dangerous, and for the most part, people try to avoid them.
So no, this isn't the entire planet.
Not
This is just
necessarily.
a section of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, that is this.
That's another thing is, as a world building DM, you can always expand on your current iteration of things if it goes well and people enjoy it. And even if they don't, I'm sure you're always developing in the back of your mind, hey, what's next, as far as what things could potentially foray into based on the story that has been told already.
Yes.
Which is really cool to me. Just as an appreciator of film and TV and media of all sorts, knowing that the creator of something can always just expand as they want, as they desire, is really cool.
And in that vein, I think it's really cool if you're, first off, if you need like to flesh out a world, let people play in it. I think it's an awesome idea. Don't ever expect that you can just present the world in its perfect state and then have people run around in it, because first off, that is way too much to bite off. Like, just
I'm going to dedicate 12 years of my life to the creation of this world before I ever let anyone see it.
Plus, it allows for your characters to have agency in the development of the world, which is always a good idea for any story. Like, the most meaningful stories, we talked about this when we were talking about like how video games become meaningful to us and how we enjoy them.
Mm-hmm.
A meaningful story is one that you as a player have agency in, and you feel like the world is changing because of you. And I think that is especially true with something like D&D, where the entire point of this game for most people is, at least in part, to experience a cool story. Some people love just I want to just fight and have combat, and that's awesome. That's a completely okay way to play D&D. It's completely appropriate to do that. But in a world that is created specifically by somebody, if you have somebody that created their own world, it's very likely that person wants that world to be explored, because story is important to them in some way or another. Otherwise, you can just be like, okay, you're all in a fighting pit, and here's the gladiator arena. Here we go, have fun. And that's cool.
That's not much of a story.
But it doesn't have to be if that's what all your players want to do, right?
True.
Like, if you get just a bunch of players that are like, all we want to do is combat, then you can absolutely just do that, and you don't have to worry about all the extra stuff. But get to know, like, there's considered these three main pillars of what D&D players enjoy. And it's always good to like match those up and make sure that you have at least one of these things in common with all of the players you have at your table. Combat, exploration, and social interaction, which would be like role playing. Those three things, like, figure out. One of the things I'll ask players before I start is, like, if you were to have 100% and you have to divide it into sections as far as like social interaction, combat, and exploration, which one of these would you put in a certain percentage of like what you enjoy the most and least, right? And that way I get to gauge, especially with one-on-one games, like, what do I need to do as the DM to make this person's experience more enjoyable?
Yeah. Yeah, Maelstrom is saying that he is in awe of people who create worlds. His friend has been working on a world, but she's doing everything from lore, gods, monsters, races, magic. You do the same in your head, but never get it on paper. Yeah, it's interesting because like everybody has an imagination, right? And I'm sure people are always, most people have an imagination, right? Maybe not Adna, but the fact that people can have an imagination, but then get it down coherently for other people to enjoy is really impressive to me as well, and I'm sure to everybody else. But that's how a lot of things start. That's how people write movies. That's how people create television shows, and they world build. This is not just it is. I was gonna say it's not just a nerd thing, but people that do that are nerds about like specific subjects and specific forms of media.
Well, if you think about it, like it's a different medium of doing something that's very common to a lot of people, like you just mentioned, because filmmakers, novelists, all these people are world builders in some way or another.
Yeah, it's just a different window you're looking through.
I honestly believe that experiencing D&D and getting at least partially invested in it will make you better at all of those other things.
Mm-hmm.
Because you are, if you imagine imagination as like a muscle, you have to exercise it for it to grow. You have to have it go through stress and strain for it to benefit and get better than it is with it. So it sort of works the same way. And if you can sort of expand the ways in which you're doing that, instead of just they say like a well-rounded education is ideal for really getting into the nooks and crannies of like building your neural pathways and everything. I think it's the same here, that like if you experience it in this way and allow people to experience something that you've created in this, where you don't have all the agency and the control over your characters, but somebody else does, or you get to play in such a way where you have agency in a world where you can literally try to do anything that you can imagine. And one of those things that sets this game apart from like, a video game where you have, invisible walls you can't go through, things like that. I really think it will make you better in any other kind of a use of your imagination. I stand by that. I've thought that for a long time.
A workout for your imagination.
Yes.
Flexing that imagination.
My head right now.
That's right. See, you're creating a world all your own.
376.
4,377. You can make yourself whatever you want to be. That's the beauty of it.
I'm gonna be buff.
See your character building right now. It's great. Yeah, so like as an outsider until recently, like an outsider to D&D, what do you think of like the whole world building aspect of it? Because you're a fan of a lot of mediums. I mean, you play Magic and all that kind of thing.
I mean, that's one of the most enticing things to me. I mean, whether it's books, movies, games, TV shows, whatever the medium is, really interesting worlds that were crafted is very important to me and draws me in a lot. Little side thing, I was asking about the map of the Barrens. One of the reasons why I always ask stuff like that is because I remember reading books like The Lord of the Rings and stuff when I was a little kid.
It has the map in the front and the back.
Looking at the map, right. And I don't know why I had this in my head, because Tolkien goes out of his way to dismiss it, but I thought that the map of Middle Earth, that was all there was on the planet. Like that was the entire planet right there, even though he talks about the elves sailing from the west, I think, or whatever it was. I mean, like he obviously adds in there are other places in this world, that's just not where we're focused.
Yeah.
So as a kid, that didn't click with me, and I thought that was the entire world. So yeah, taking really well-built stories like Tolkien's worlds or Brandon Sanderson's worlds, or I mean whatever, pick a good book series, and then having that realization later as the story continues to develop that you thought the world was this big and really it's this big, and then maybe later it's actually this big. That kind of stuff is really cool to me.
Yeah,
it
really helps as like the person designing it to focus and pinpoint on a place and get a lot of rich lore into a place and not worry about all the rest of the world, just the place that your players are going to experience.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's a pretty good mark of a creator of any kind, is that you have this location or this story that you're telling, you're focusing on, but in the background you have all these other things developing that can be used later on. So you're never short of content as far as what you can create, because you're always thinking ahead as far as that goes.
A nice World of Warcraft reference / joke there from Zarin Maelstrom. So in World of Warcraft, there is a section in Kalimdor, that's the eastern or the western continent, near where the orcs start, and there's a place called the Barrens, and there's this quest that is notorious in the classic version of Warcraft, where you have to go find a character, an orc's wife, and his name is Mvnk, and his wife is out somewhere missing, but she's notoriously difficult to find for some reason, and I don't remember why. I don't remember if her body like moves places or whatnot, but you find her corpse, and Mvnk's wife is like a big joke. The other big joke I remember from the Barrens in World of Warcraft is everybody talks about Chuck Norris nonstop in the chat.
Time.
Just in that location?
Yes, in the Barrens specifically.
Why?
I don't know.
It's just like
right. So yeah, Maelstrom. It's just like there's no information on where she is. You have to scour the entire the country,
and it's a big area.
It is. It is. Yeah, it's changed a lot since Cataclysm. I remember that much, but yeah.
Well, yeah, back in original at least,
the original
big area.
Yeah, and you can play World of Warcraft Classic now. They release servers where you can go play the old original version.
That's a good example of a world that's always expanding.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, that's like a real-time video game D&D.
Like I like some of the later expansions go back, like instead of adding new areas, they go back to the original areas and change them. Like the world has evolved in real time since you were there last, which is cool.
Yep. it's a classic.
Where is she?
Maybe I'll make homage to that, because there's a significant population of orcs in the Barrens that are very different in their outlook, but
so you have orcs, you have half orcs, and something that it was like a half dwarf, half orc thing.
Yeah, bunch of half breeds.
Dwarf or something.
Yeah, a dwark.
What did you call it?
A dwark.
Yeah, so I found like this really obscure material from an older version of D&D, because I also collect like old books of, not just old, like, first off, I collect like old American literature and things like this, and like, but I have a second edition copy of Little Women, and I have like all these things that are like really old, what I consider like just neat, impressive real world books. But I also collect D&D material the same way. So
how many, if you could sum it up without having to count them, how many D&D books you think you have?
Well, most of my older D&D books are actually digital resources, and I actually saw that when I was doing that thing where cleaning out my computer, I saw how many of them were just dedicated to that, and I have well over 100 of those. So I have a lot of PDF versions of those. Yeah, and that's from various editions, from the original D&D to first, to second to 3.5 to 4. Yeah, all sorts of stuff.
A lot of reference materials. There's a lot to go on.
Yep.
I just saw the GIF race.
Yeah, Ogrelons. Sorry, go ahead.
Anthropomorphic hippopotamuses who have developed an uncanny knack for firearms and battle.
Yeah, so the cool thing about the GIF in D&D lore is they are actually from a version of a campaign setting of D&D that happened way back during like Marvel Comic Age and everything, where people were like, let's do D&D but in space. So there's like this space version called Spelljammer, where people basically are going through space to different planets and stuff, and they're on these ships called Spelljammers, and you have like these sort of sometimes semi-organic, sometimes completely mechanical, like space boats essentially, and GIF are from that originally. In my world,
Treasure Planet.
In my world, they're not of that tradition, and they didn't come from there.
So where did you get the picture for the dwark? Because it's like actually a gun slinging orc.
So that one, I found the reason I can't like copyright or anything in this book right away is because I just found some images online as temporary representations. I just found that online, and I was like, well, I'm gonna put that in there.
Well, it looks awesome.
We need to get you some original artwork done so you can copyright this and start shelling it out to people that want to play.
Yeah.
Is that the ultimate goal? I mean, with this
I would
particular
love to eventually
document?
put it on the Dungeon Masters Guild, which is a website.
Oh, that's true. Maelstrom is an artist as well.
To homebrew, and which homebrew in D&D terms refers to anything that you've created yourself that you can use like in your own campaign or your own material. But the Dungeon Masters Guild is a website that is christened by Wizards of the Coast and functions through Drive-Through RPG, I believe is the actual name of the website. But they allow you to sort of use their and assets and resources to make your own homebrew and then sell it on there.
Nice.
Yeah. They're very supportive of that sort of thing. You just have to abide by the particular open game license rules and have those in your documents, things like that.
So what? Give you another 2 months and you'll be selling this?
Probably not 2 months. I'd want to get to the point that I have like actual digital art and stuff that's unique to it that I can or have access to it and have permissions for it. But yeah, eventually that'd be cool.
Well, you know a couple of artists. Maelstrom also draws. I don't know if Maelstrom, if you have any experience with like fantasy type creatures, but
because it's related to the grander world of D&D, that it's interesting that reminded me. Critical Role recently worked with Wizards to create a source book called Explorer's Guide to Wildmount, which is the area where this newest campaign is set that they've been doing.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things they do, because they're so fan oriented and community oriented, they used a lot of community art from their fans and put it in the book.
That's cool.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Get those artists some exposure as well. You've done WoW fan art.
Oh, that's awesome. Could you link to any of those?
Yeah, if you have any kind of
That'd be
links
awesome.
to a website or any kind of artwork.
WoW fan art.
Yeah, they had a whole fan art section. I don't know if it's there anymore, but they used to. It was awesome. It was so well done. Like
it was.
Like, all the art in there was amazing.
Yeah, if you have any links or documentation to that kind of fantasy world WoW fan art, we'd love to see it.
Yep.
You can even link it in the Discord so that it's not just in chat, but it can be in Discord as well. I think we have a section for
photography and art or something. Yeah.
I had a question for Adenoth about the character that you played.
Oh, okay.
So just like, who was the character? What was your what were they like, or do you even remember the name?
Oh yeah.
Oh, what did I name him?
And what race?
He was a wood elf. Hold on.
Don't think it exists anymore. Posted them on DeviantArt 8 years ago. Yeah. Well, that's unfortunate. You gotta back up those art pieces. Save them to a hard drive. We want to see them.
And I know that like your wife has been in contact with Orpheus and like talking a lot about the lore, so she can sort of flesh out her character more.
Oh yeah. Xanther. That's what I named my character. Yeah, so it was a wood elf, ranger, beastmaster.
Nice.
And I had a
I'm the beastmaster
named Shade.
Nice.
Yeah,
nice.
And he was pretty dope. And funny story, when Cody had my brother help me create a character and help Katie create a character, he gave Michael like a list of classes that he thought would work best in the role that he was envisioning for us in this one-off campaign for Lucy. And so one of them was Ranger. Well, I guess after he did that, he told Michael to help us create something. I guess he assumed that it didn't happen, so he created characters for us as well, but they were more specifically scripted to
Oh, I gotcha.
a specific place. So then when we got there and we were like, okay, here are our characters, he was like, what? Anyway, so he was thinking ranger, but he was thinking more like a stealthy and like a sniper kind of ranger thing. I don't remember what the subclass is for that instead of beastmaster, but so when I got there and I was a beastmaster, this is taking place in like a town. I mean, a big city with mansions and stuff.
Beautiful.
And I have a panther that is part of my skill set. Like, it's not just like a little familiar or something. It's like part of what I do. It's like, I guess you can bring the panther. I don't know what you're gonna do with it, but so we sneak into this castle that we're trying to steal the gem from, and I have the panther like hiding in this underground passage into the castle that I go and open, and then I let so there's a panther with me in this castle underground in the secret areas where nobody is, and it was kind of hilarious.
Nice.
I feel like you could have some fun with a Beastmaster class, like in a big city setting. You could just like start controlling people's hamsters and house cats.
It doesn't work exactly like that, but that would be funny. Yeah.
I mean, in that kind of setting, though, I feel like you could bend the rules a little bit for that.
Yeah.
Panthers are sneaky boys. That's
When
right.
Beastmaster is, you don't have your own pet, you just control everybody else's.
Cat army.
Yeah, I'm a mind control wizard, but specifically I work with hamsters.
Hamsters and parrots.
That reminds me of there was that movie, what was it called, William or something, about the guy who was like the Pied Piper. He just like all the rats were his friends.
What?
Oh, there was like a movie. I think it was a thriller where there was like this ostracized guy and he just like basically spent time with a bunch of rats until they were like his minions, and it was like a modern retelling of the Pied Piper or something like that.
That sounds terrifying.
Yeah.
I don't know that I want to see that movie. You remember that?
It was like one of those things where I only saw the trailer and I never thought it after that, but it made an impression on me. Just the trailer.
A Bard Ranger hybrid that's Pied Piper in the big city.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that would be interesting. So you didn't try to control any house cats?
Well, that wasn't part of my skill, no.
Okay.
Yeah.
Disappointed.
Nice. So I remember when you and I were playing, one of the things that I would do is I would do like flashback games just with one-on-one players to sort of show them things that happened in their past, and in the process of this, like give them extra like magical equipment or stuff like that. And I did that with you, Monk, when we were doing the starter set, and you were a druid. And your name was I don't remember what your name was, but
I don't either.
It started with an L. Lose something.
Lose Theron?
No.
I don't
remember. Anyway, is that a Mistborn thing?
No, I didn't read that.
Yeah, I didn't read them. But you were the kind of druid that can transform into animals more effectively. And
yeah.
You were chasing down this one guy. You guys had all together captured a
I was basically Link from Twilight Princess.
Yes, you're right. But you'd captured this criminal who had been causing a lot of trouble. And
wait, do you mean Zelda?
No, shut up.
And
I could transform.
You're saying this wrong, man.
I could transform into a wolf.
And he was a
Link.
wizard. This guy was a wizard, and he like took advantage of an opening in the jail cell when you were going to talk to him, and like went invisible and ran for it, and you chased him just by sniffing him out, and you bit his hands off based on the way you rolled. I remember this.
Yeah, I remember that. So he couldn't like perform any magic or
you
something
were like,
too.
Nope, you're not going to be able to do any more magic, and you bit his hands off. And
yikes.
In wolf form.
And you were right in the middle of the town green with like children playing. I remember.
Oh, I don't remember that. Just like in the middle of public area,
Yeah.
biting some guy's hands off.
But
It's pretty messed up.
those were fun. I enjoyed. That was my first like experience of like, you know what, I would like to do one-on-one games with people just to sort of flesh out their characters, and I did some of that. I did that as well with Waiting Warrior because he was in that game, and Waiting Warrior brother was in that game, and I did that a few times with him. But yeah, there was a lot of fun stuff. One of the things that I think is the neatest aspects of what can happen like when you're playing a character in D&D is that I once played a character in Michael's campaign, where I feel like I grew as a person in real life from playing that character, and especially because it lent itself to a lot of role play and story driven moments. See, my previous character had been killed, and he was a druid. It was a half-orc druid that was very much into like helping animals. Like he would go and like find a scarab and be like, "What do you want most out of life?" That sort of thing. But he died, and I was like, I'm gonna play the exact opposite, an exotic game hunter. And when I played this guy, the basic thing was I'm just gonna make him just like a jerk. And so he was like this spoiled rich brat exotic game hunter guy, and but he like had really terrible relationships with his family, and he and over time I realized that I as a player lean more towards playing like good characters, but I was playing this guy who was at best neutral, and in the process he basically, the character itself, sort of his story developed where he really wanted to be a better person than he was, but like he just failed miserably when he tried to do those things. Like he made very significant promises to people that like became this one citizen that became like his ward, and then immediately like the next day after making this huge promise, like immediately broke it. And he just like everything that he did, he was just trying to be a better person. In the process of playing him, I realized that there were certain aspects of his personality that I actually shared, and I felt like I was growing and getting all of the catharsis of whenever he did something good, I was feeling it as a player. It was a really interesting experience.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I think that's a good transition into what can be one of our final topics, is the benefits of D&D as far as mental health goes. I know that was a big focus of when we did Dungeon Source.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things we talked about the most in like the podcasts afterwards was the benefits of D&D, is something that you were pretty passionate about at the time. And I think, just to put it simply, kind of what we were talking about when we were talking about video games is it's another form of escapism, which I guess all kinds of media is. I mean, if you're watching a movie, watching a TV show, playing a game, video game or otherwise, it's another form of escapism that you can kind of forget your problems and or even work through things. I think
Yes.
based on or being somebody else, you can work through problems that can otherwise kind of weigh you down a little bit. So I know that it has helped a lot of people in the past with things like that and mental health issues, and I know that you're pretty passionate about that as well.
Yes, and I still have a big interest in that. One of the original draws for me to sort of justify my wanting to buy books and like get into this was, I was like, maybe I could like end up doing something that would be helpful in regards to this. And I researched and seen that Wizards is also very supportive of that. They are, even right now during the COVID-19, they're releasing a bunch of free materials, free simple materials for people to sort of do so they can be encouraged to stay in the house and play along with. You can go on the Dungeons and Dragons website and find those. Yeah, I've seen studies about how it really helps people that have certain anxiety or issues with anxiety. In some cases, depression, but it mostly has been for anxiety for a lot of people, especially social anxiety, but also social development. So another game that I'm involved in now that haven't been doing for a while with the pandemic going on, but I run a game with a bunch of teenagers that some people I know all wanted me to sort of do a one-shot thing with them just for fun on New Year's, and it turned into a full-fledged game. And some of these are teens. They're sort of on the younger end of their teenage years. Are have various issues with their speech development issues or things like that. And it's been really cool to sort of watch them sort of become passionate about something in which they can go after a goal in a safe setting, and also develop their social interaction capabilities with other players at the table. Because right now there's 7 kids that I'm running this with, and
That's cool.
yeah, and it's been really cool. One of the neatest things about this is that I expected them all to want to be little edgelords, but they went out of their way in this thing that I designed for them to like do the right thing in every situation and what they consider, and not like this is the thing that's going to cause us to progress, but like what is the right thing to do so that we don't dishonor this character or like end up doing something that would harm them in some way. And it was really neat to watch that, and the level of purity that sort of sort of stemmed out of that was really beautiful. I enjoyed seeing that a lot, because I had a situation in which basically the key they needed, they had met along this adventure a living talking skeleton that was reanimated by magic, but the key to progressing through one of these things was actually in its head, and they had to like basically be willing to break this guy's head open to get it. But they went out of their way to find a way to make sure that they didn't have to do that. And I'd never even anticipated that somebody might do that, and it was really cool. And so it's been a cool experience with them. And you could have a whole other topic on specifically running D&D for a younger audience, because it is very different in a lot of ways. But I know specifically there are some parents that have come up to me after these games and told me about how much they appreciate just this medium that these kids are able to experience in regards to helping them develop and sort of have that in certain ways. One of them is a homeschool family, and she actually sort of considers it in part something that is used toward some sort of homeschool credit type thing, just because it's like a 3 to 4 hour long period where they are solving problems and puzzles, and
It's educational.
Doing this with their imagination.
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome.
That is really cool.
Fun. Yeah. But aside from that, a lot of people have used it to sort of experience, like, I have this life experience right now that is something that I am uncomfortable with, or like uncomfortable sharing with people, or I want to be able to sort of get through it or navigate it in a way that it's scary in the real world. But you could do that vicariously through a character and experience a lot of the same things, especially if you have a DM that is cognizant of the fact that that characters are characters, and they have these particular flaws and needs and desires or things like that they can sort of help with.
Sure. I think it's interesting how a lot of people will kind of change their not change their personalities, but for the benefit of the game, completely do something opposite of what they might do in real life. So like if you're more risk adverse in real life, you might be a risk taker in the game. Your character might be a risk taker, and that's kind of a way to learn and grow, even if it isn't a fictional world, to kind of experiment with certain like attitudes or ways of looking at things.
Yeah, there's a friend of ours, a mutual friend, that he was in that first campaign that we went, and he had a very different idea of what was appropriate in role play and what wasn't, and he was very aggressive.
I was actually thinking of the same thing when I was talking about that. Like,
and I talked to him eventually afterwards, and he understood that he got to the point that, like, first off, people didn't know him that well, so they were just assuming, wow, he is his character, right? Because we don't know the way. And he was really aggressive with the way that he was going about it. And just knowing him personally, like, there are a lot of things that he is reasonably angry about in his past anyway, which I completely understand after having talked to him. But one of the things he shared with me one time after I did a one with him to explore that character was he happened to have this situation with family members, his characters, and it kind of reflected his real life situation. And he had this like appreciation that he shared with me about sort of being able to work through that in the game, and I had no idea that was going on in life. But it was really interesting to sort of see that afterwards, that he had benefited from living vicariously through this experience and through this character, but also learned more about what might be appropriate or not appropriate to interact with in real people through this character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking about that as well, just how interesting it was that a lot of us didn't know this particular person, and then we saw his character, and that can be kind of dangerous too, like,
yeah,
because like rubbed me the wrong way. Like,
yeah.
And I knew it was like his character, but the way he would act would still be kind of like, I don't know how I feel about this.
Yeah. It was sort of a storm of unfortunate circumstances that all
right. So all that to say, be
Yeah.
careful. You should try to get to know some people, play with people you know. Maybe, I mean, it's always good to make new friends, but
yeah, and he's a really good friend of mine now too. Like, and he plays with me in other campaigns and things now.
You can't play your band from playing. You assimilate the character too much. Wow, really? That's interesting. I guess that can be a danger.
Wow, interesting.
As far as taking on too much,
yeah,
of yourself into the character. It's interesting.
I'd never even considered that. I suppose I could see like that being something that could be recommended by a medical professional if it's something that you were leaning too heavily to that. That's really interesting.
LARP session where I had a character that was heavily copied from Hannibal Lecter. It got stuck.
So how many people did you eat during that week?
Right, yeah. Don't tell us.
I really want to LARP someday. I think that would be a fun experience at least once.
Yeah, I've never done that either.
Most of the time you hear people talk about it, they're referring to like battlefield LARP of some sort, where they've got like their foam weapons and things, which would also be really cool. But somebody invited me and I just wasn't able to take the time to go do it to a live action RP that was not combat based. It was based on a White Wolf game called I think Changeling the Lost Ones, I think it was, but it's basically like Werewolf, the something, Vampire the Masquerade, all these games designed as LARP, where you can interact with people in a real world setting with people dressed as the characters. And I thought it was such a cool concept, and I really wanted to do it, but I never got the time to be able to.
Yeah, I've never LARPed. I've never even been to like a Renaissance fair where people will like do medieval LARPing or anything like that. But
also, did you just say you've never been to a Renaissance fair?
Yeah, I think no, I don't think I have. I think we've talked about going a couple times when we were in Tampa, because they have that big one every year. But we never did get a chance to do that. I'm
so used to the Texas Renfest, which is humongous. It's the second biggest one in the world. So
wow.
Yeah, so like that one that's fun, but it's like a little tiny thing to me. The Tampa one, but man,
yeah,
I love Renfest. They're so awesome.
I just wanted to get one of those big turkey legs.
Oh yeah,
that's all.
So here in Indianapolis, there every year is a Viking Fest. That it's basically a Renaissance fair, but the setting is Vikings.
That's awesome.
And Katie and her mom went last year and said it was awesome. So we're hoping that doesn't get canceled by all this crazy world stuff, because I'd like to go see it.
It would make sense if they probably skipped this year, depending on when it happens. But
shut it. Yeah.
Don't you put that dark magic on us.
But that's, oh man, I love it. So the Texas Ren Fair actually has like themed weekends. One of them is a barbarian one. There's like a pirate themed weekend at one point. Some of it is just standard. One's like a fairy like theme thing where it's all like mystical. It's really it's a cool experience because it lasts for like 2 months.
What?
Yeah. It's like just a 2-month period where people come and like bring their shops and set up their shops there and stuff, and then they camp out. It's awesome.
That's crazy. You said that's in Texas?
Yeah, the Texas Ren Fest.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Maelstrom, it sounds like you get pretty in depth into a character.
Yeah, it sounds like he'd be the method actor that sends dead rats to his co-actors from his trailer and
The
threatens
Jared
them.
Leto. Leto.
Yeah,
I don't know how to
Jared
say his
Leto,
name.
yeah.
Jared Leto. Yep.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Is there anything else you want to talk about as far as your campaign that you're writing? I think you've gone into
Yeah,
depth
I think
of
I
it.
went to enough detail there. Eventually, I might even because I do it to sell out someday. But you've got depending on the number of your Twitch subscribers and whatnot, let you release it to them for free or whatever. That'd be cool.
Hey, you hear that? That's cool.
But yeah, I thoroughly enjoy it as D&D in general as a player and a DM. I think I lean more towards being a time now where when I'm a player, I have certain frustrations of like, oh, I really like this story, but I want it to go this way, and so it's better, I think, from my experience to have the experience of DMing than playing most of the time now. But I do enjoy both. But some people, go either way. But I think as we said, just to briefly touch on this again, I think it's an incredibly useful experience for anybody that likes to sort of create or stretch their creative muscles and their imagination. And I think there are a variety of ways, and depending on your circumstances, it really could be useful for getting through certain social anxieties or mental health issues to sort of fit.
And now that you've dipped your toe into the world of D&D, do you think it will be something you continue to enjoy and do in the future?
It's definitely possible. Life circumstances would have to line up where it happens again.
I mean, all things being equal, is it something that you enjoyed and would have a desire to do in the future? Nothing having to do with outside influences.
I mean, yeah, it would depend on. For me, it would definitely depend on who is involved. Being with people like in this case that we're all people I've known for years and have been really good friends with. Another situation like that, where it's an opportunity to spend more time with people I already like spending time with. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And for people that don't know, if you ever have, a lot of people say that playing D&D, a lot of local game shops do have a thing called Adventures League where you can go in even as a new player that is not experienced whatsoever and go in and kind of a little bit learn the ropes and then go on adventures with during certain nights of the week whenever they host it with an experienced DM to sort of help you through a very simple one. It's usually not, they'll ask, like in traditional campaigns, they'll be like, where did you come from? What's your background story? In these situations, they are like, if you want to come up with that, that's fine, but we're just here to sort of say, here's where you are and here's what you're party. So it's very much streamlined in that regard. But you can get like lasting rewards and things that are like signed off on that you can use with this character until they die at other adventures.
Yeah. That's going to be my last question to you, was going to be, do you have any resources for anybody who either would like to get into playing D&D or would like to get into DMing?
Yeah. If you go on the Dungeons & Dragons website, you can see the basic rules that have all that you need to just build a few basic characters and understand the mechanics of the game. That's a really good place to start if you don't know anything about it yet. And then after that, if you want to graduate beyond just the limited classes and races and things that are presented there, I recommend getting the player handbook. Or if you know that you're going to be stuck on D&D and like a part of it, absolutely go for the player handbook. It's a great resource to have.
Well, thanks guys for tuning in today and for all your questions and your input and your comments on the Dungeons and Dragons episode. Dyer, thank you for your expertise and kind of sharing your creation with us.
Sure.
Adnoth, thanks for being here and providing a beginner level view, I guess, to D&D and what your thoughts are about that.
Okay, you can say thanks for being here and being dumb.
That's
I
not
accept.
that's not what I was thinking at all.
Yeah.
It was a good perspective that you provided,
Yeah.
being
It
new
is-
to D&D.
Yeah, and it really is something that, like we said, it has a learning curve that's going to be there, but just a few games in, and it really does get that much simpler. You just understand. I think when you get to the point that you understand, I am allowed to just make decisions and try anything, and your DM allows that and explains how it works, then there it is. That's how it works.
There you go. That's it.
Basically all there is to it, really. And the DM will know all the mechanics and the rules for seeing how successful things are.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's like other resources you can find for finding people that are into D&D and all that kind of thing as well. Find people.
I think you can go on D&D Beyond on their forums and also find groups.
Yeah. Well, cool. Thanks, guys, for watching. If you're watching on YouTube later on after the live stream, after it's been uploaded, make sure you hit the subscribe button if you want to see some more of Monk's Musings. This has been episode 3. I'm Monk, and we'll talk to you later.
Bye.